Welcome to Philosophy of Value Workshops number 26 of Series 7. The question for today is, can Aristotle's virtue theory ethics be reformulated in terms of value states? Reading, for those who want it, from one of my works, The Pursuit of Value, Chapter 4, Section 7. In recent workshops, I have been discussing the main ethical theories of Stoic, utilitarian and Kantian ethics. Now, despite my criticism about ethics in general, ethical principles are values that guide moral action. A study of ethics is thereby also a study of value and values central to my account of life. And my guiding principle is the will to value, or the value of value, leading to a certain sufficiency of value. Today I want to discuss Aristotle's virtue theory of ethics, which shares several things in common with my own. One is that Aristotle is concerned with living a good life rather than moral action. Another is employing an organic rather than an algorithmic determination of human action. I will explain these different positions in due course. Yet Aristotle's virtue theory is also subject to several failings that I hope to rectify. Two of these are a neglect of value and an inability to provide a clear principle to act upon. My answer is to retain the celebrated conceptual framework of virtue theory, but replace the virtues and dispositions with values and value states. We can initially define virtue theory by contrast and comparison to other theories, as well as in terms of value. We should first note that all ethical principles are values that guide moral action. Utilitarianism, for example, values happiness for the greatest number of people. Kantian ethics values reason and volition in the form of the good will. And Aristotle's virtue theory primarily values excellence of character and human flourishing. Further to these comparisons, last week we noted Elizabeth Anscombe's famous critique of Kantian ethics. She argued that the ideas of duty, obligation and law given by God have weakened or have been rejected. She advocated replacing these principles with particular virtues as held in Aristotelian ethics. Other thinkers have also appealed to Aristotle to redress overemphasis on rationality and universality. Kant, for example, exhorted absolute impartiality in, for example, treating family and strangers alike, which seems inhuman. Virtue theory seems preferable here in considering the attitudes and dispositions as a moral criteria. There is also a well-known example showing how Kantian duty might be superseded by Aristotelian virtue. That is, if I did something good for a friend and told him that I did it out of duty, he would be disappointed. This is because there is something morally lacking in the idea of just acting out of duty. But virtue theory accounts for acting out of friendship, disposition or character. Aristotle's virtue theory regards morality as a matter of acting out of good character or disposition. Yet acting on a disposition or an inclination to do good is oddly denigrated in Kantian ethics. On virtue theory, acts of duty or obligation are regarded as only attempts to do good. This is because virtue theory looks to an internalization of virtue as a kind of second nature. We will have another look at this point shortly. Yet we can note three more ways in which Aristotle's virtue theory can be contrasted to Kantian ethics. 1. Kant's reason, intention and goodwill are replaced by good character or virtuous dispositions. And virtuous dispositions are constituted by virtues like loyalty, honesty and generosity. Plato and Aristotle gave four cardinal virtues of temperance, justice, prudence and courage. And Aristotle named magnanimity as the primary or crowning virtue. Secondly, Aristotle's objective is the good life, or to live well. It's not just ethical conduct, intention or theory, as in Kantian and other theories of ethics. And thirdly, Kant and Aristotle also have different attitudes to happiness. For Kant, happiness is a human good and a consequence of morality, but not its objective. But for Aristotle, happiness isn't just a virtue, it is part of the good life and an objective of life. And Aristotle originally spoke of happiness as eudaimonia, which is the final human objective. But Aristotelian happiness, or eudaimonia, has a special meaning different from the modern usage. It is human flourishing or the moral satisfaction that results from virtuous activity. Yet less credibly, the Greeks generally believed in a unity of the virtues, which is expressed in different ways. Socrates, Plato and the Stoics believed in a hierarchy of virtues that were unified and subjugated to wisdom. Aristotle didn't emphasize wisdom and knowledge to the same extent as these other thinkers, yet he still believed in the unity of virtue, in which one virtue could not be held without the others. For example, a Nazi could not be courageous, which today is a contentious view that I also don't hold. And Aristotle's unity extended to the idea that virtue promotes happiness. Yet Aristotle's view of the causes or conditions of happiness seem more realistic than that of the Stoics. Aristotle held that both virtue and good fortune were required to produce happiness, but the Stoics held that only virtue was required to produce happiness. This is a hugely optimistic belief that nevertheless depends on a definition of happiness. Yet the unity of the virtues is also more realistically held together by having a common goal or objective. So Aristotle's virtue theory is teleological in that it is directed towards the goal of eudaimonia. He writes, "Will not knowledge of the good have a great influence on life? Shall we not, like archers who have a mark to aim at, be more likely to hit the right thing?" It is the goal of eudaimonia that determines what the virtues are aimed at and what they are. Yet the notion of having a clear and certain idea of the goal of life is implausible to many modern thinkers. For example, commenting on this passage, David Wiggins states that, "But in reality there is no such thing as the good, no such thing as knowledge of it, and nothing fixed independently of ourselves to aim at." Yet to determine normative virtues or values, Aristotle also advocates the golden mean or middle way of moderation. That is, virtue lies in a moderation between two extremes. For example, in the case of courage, the extremes might be recklessness and cowardice, or in the virtue of modesty, humility would be a deficiency, and pride would be an excess. Or in ambition as a virtue, sloth would be deficient and greed would be an excess. We can note a difference from Christian virtues such as humility, chastity, obedience, faith, hope and love. Greek thought prized natural virtues of beauty and power, also favoured by Nietzsche. And Christian virtues might be expressing weakness and self-abnegation as criticised of religion. Yet Christian apologists have sometimes quoted St. Paul as saying that we must have moderation in all things. But virtue theorists have replied that this is a mistranslation of acting appropriately on Christian tenets. Such differences between Greek and Christian virtues raise the question of cultural and ethical relativity. Aristotle, for example, advocates the golden mean or the middle way of moderation. But some circumstances call for extreme behaviour, such as fighting for your life. And we can easily find other examples of cultural relativity in ancient Greece. 1. Equal status or respect of citizens didn't extend to women or slaves in ancient Greece. 2. Greek athletes performing nude had a different conception of modesty. This was because it was thought that clothes polluted the body rather than covering its shame. Problems of cultural relativity also prompt us to ask more about the foundations of virtue theory ethics. We find that the roots of the virtues lie in common sense, social convention and natural processes. But these ideas are susceptible to modern concerns about the justification of moral values. These concerns follow from Hume's is-ought distinction, G.E. Moore's naturalistic fallacy, and Mackey's argument that there are no objective values. This is a problem about virtue theory that we need to resolve. Despite the recent renaissance of Aristotle's virtue theory, it is thought to lack an appreciation of the concept of value. Yet Karl Marx may have overstated the point in saying that Aristotle had no concept of value. The concept of value was well known in ancient Greece. The word for value in Greek is axia. Aristotle actually coined the word ethics, and Plato discussed inherent or intrinsic good. Yet neither the fact value or the is-ought distinctions were known in ancient Greece, and of course the concept of value was not used as a principle of ethics. Aristotelian virtue does nevertheless employ the mental states of character and disposition, but these omit Kantian moral features of goodwill, intention and the value of people as ends in themselves. And Aristotle also fallaciously defined objects by attributing them with the value state of purpose. For example, it is part of the purpose of a stone to bury itself deeper into the ground. And Aquinas followed Aristotle's definitions in terms of purpose. In her modern moral philosophy, Elizabeth Anscombe alludes to this neglect of value. She writes that the term moral itself just doesn't seem to fit in its modern sense into an account of Aristotelian ethics, because, among other reasons, Anscombe tells us it lacks the concept of a moral sense of ought. Alistair MacIntyre elaborates the point and informs us that in Latin, as in ancient Greek, there is no word correctly translated by our word moral. Cicero invented moralis to translate the word ethikos, pertaining to character. Moreover, Aristotle's crowning virtue of magnanimity, or a great-souled person, has lost some of its luster. This is so because Aristotle tells us that the primary concern of a great-souled person is honour. Honour is what we call a value state of interest here, as I'll explain shortly. But to the point, in the modern world, honour is not so highly prized as it used to be. This disfavour is explained by Ryan Brown in the difference between dignity cultures and honour cultures. Dignity cultures derive value from our humanity, self-esteem and personal qualities. Honour cultures derive value from social esteem and reputation. And the ancient Greek culture was highly social and even regarded as essential to one's humanity. To add to these points about the neglected aspects of moral value, we can also say that Aristotelian ethics accepted naturalistic ideals without demur, was blind to the fact value problem, and it also neglected executive virtues like goodwill and self-esteem. These don't directly imply action and employ value at a more prominently abstract level. This neglect of value adds to the further problem of virtue theory of not being able to provide clear principles of action. This is because values give focus to reasons for action, whereas dispositions are inherently opaque. And because the virtues can't be rigidly defined, clear principles of action can't be provided. This is the opposite to the Kantian problem of attempting to determine action for every conceivable circumstance. This may be advantageous over strict Kantian principles, unable to cope with the complexities of life. But this leads John McDowell to describe principles of action in virtue theory as uncodifiable. Yet this problem of not providing specific rules of guidance is shared with existentialist ethics. That is, existentialism has a problem deriving specific guidance from its tenets of freedom and authenticity. Sartre said that his ethics protects the freedom of others, but this is hardly an adequate principle of ethics. The problem for virtue theory is that if principles of action are difficult to discern, how can we act on them? On this question, Aristotle was asked, if only the virtuous could act virtuously, how do we become virtuous? His answer was, practice the virtues in order to internalize them, to become second nature. The answer may be adequate for applied or practical ethics, but it leaves a theory of ethics that we can believe in with crucial loose ends. I just noted that values give greater focus to reasons for action than inherently opaque dispositions to act. Yet I argue that values can provide a more secure basis for action than just giving greater focus. To do this, we need to give a quick outline of three basic theories of reasons for action. These are cognitive, desire-based and value-based theories of action. Firstly, a cognitive theory of action typically holds that reason or a conception of things alone can motivate. This view involves the cognitive, non-cognitive debate that I don't need to discuss here. Secondly, on a desire-based theory of action, a reason for motivation is produced by the satisfaction of a desire. That is, if an action promotes the satisfaction of a desire, we have reason to perform the action. Thirdly, a value-based theory of reasons for actions draw on values, facts, and actions required for certain goals. And those values, facts, actions, and goals make them relevantly good or worth achieving. Barry Maguire writes about this promising but surprisingly overlooked value-based theory of reasons. And a value-based theory of reasons is also central to Derek Parfit's integrative theory of ethics. But we have to ask, what is the underlying value or values of such a value-based theory of reasons? Parfit offers Kantian-like irreducible normative truths as a foundation, but his arguments for such are inconclusive, and they resemble Kant's unavoidable and admittedly unprovable postulates. Yet in my view, a more promising answer lies in a reformulation of virtue theory as a value theory ethic. On this view, the agent's assessment of good or bad is reflected back onto himself, and this explains the distinctively elevating character of ethical experience. This also explains both the formal normativity and the material relativity of ethics. And practical action can be derived from the pursuit and maintenance of value. But a fuller account of these views can only be given elsewhere, as I will begin to do next week. For the moment, we can look at how this value theory view corresponds with Aristotle's virtue theory ethic. So we need to look at the attractions and deficiencies of virtue theory, as well as how it is to be amended. The attractiveness of virtue theory derives from several features. One of these is its modern appreciation of the good life and happiness as human objectives. It is also able to incorporate human judgment with its emphasis on disposition and character. And its idea of internalization has connotations with a modern unconscious notion of mind. But virtue theory also has deficiencies that we can now review and summarize. We can list at least 6 or 7 deficiencies of virtue theory that, in my view, follow from a neglect of value. 1. Virtue theory is inattentive to the intrinsic value of other people as ends in themselves. 2. It also underappreciates goodwill and intention as crucial principles of moral value. 3. It neglects rights and duties not contributing to the good life of the self and the community. 4. It doesn't consider the fact, value and the is-ought distinctions and the naturalistic fallacy. So Greek ethics was naturalistic and used human nature and culture as a criterion of value. There is 5. There is also the problem of providing clear principles of action, and 6. As a result of that lack of clarity, it fails to explain an agent's obligation to act. And 7. Happiness or eudaimonia as virtuous activity also depended on opportunities afforded by human fortune. That is, circumstances like having friends, family, wealth, health, strength and beauty. Is this being realistic or failing to focus on what morality should be, like Stoics and Kantians? This is a question taken up in Bernard Williams' book entitled Moral Luck. Given these failings, as well as the strengths of virtue theory, I want to consider how value theory ethics might supersede virtue theory ethics, yet at the same time retain many of the features and conceptual frameworks of virtue theory. To do this, I will compare three features of value theory ethics with virtue theory ethics. These are a comparison of value states with virtues or virtue states, and a comparison of different explanations of reasons for action in, for example, Kantian or virtue or value explanations of reasons for action. My objective is to retain the conceptual framework and valid features of virtue theory while resolving its problems. One way to do this is to apply the much discussed distinction between internal and external reasons for action. Bernard Williams, for example, discusses the question with a certain skepticism for external reasons. Yet John McDowell considers the question of whether external reasons might be possible. But we don't have to adjudicate the debate in order to use the distinction. The problem for Kant is mandating moral values by external reasons of universalization and certain conceptions of things. That is, Kantian motivation is externally mandated by reason, knowledge, which impel duty and obligation. This involves the question of the validity of external reasons, as well as issues raised by Hume, Moore and Mackey. But virtue theory finds internal reasons for action and is internally motivated by good character and disposition. Yet the problem for virtue theory is how to validate an internal pattern of motivation. That is, to provide clear principles of action which also explain the process of moral motivation. My answer is to replace the virtues with value states in order to maintain the same pattern of internal motivation, and that value states will be able to provide both normative guidance and motivational force. But before explaining how this can be done, I should explain what value states are. The notion of value states is my own term for mental states that necessarily contain values. Value states are, for example, love, hate, dignity, self-esteem, honour, duty, resentment, fear and desire. Notice that value states are both positive and negative values that can nevertheless be differentiated intuitively. Cognitive states like thought, perception, reason, belief and memory aren't value states. I provide a much longer list of value states in my following notes. Now, the virtues are compatible with value states because they are already virtual value states but reconceived. Value states are virtues like courage, loyalty, honesty, generosity and magnanimity. I thereby propose the reconfiguration of virtue theory as a value theory ethics. This retains the advantages of virtue theory while resolving its problems with the concept of value. Yet I would like to make a further comparison here between virtue theory and value theory. Aristotle identifies eudaimonia as the supreme good, which he qualifies as self-sufficient. And as the supreme good is a moral concept, it can be inferred to be a sufficiency of value. Aristotle's magnanimity as the crowning virtue also implies an abundance of value. This builds on the idea that value is determined by what one gives, not what one has. Now, the principle of the will to value has been argued to result in a certain sufficiency of value, and we have just found a parallel with this sufficiency of value in Aristotle's ethics. Yet the viability of value theory as a theory of ethics has yet to be established. Yet I have prepared the ground for this argument with critiques of other theories of ethics, and I will provide arguments for value theory ethics next week. Yet I can make a couple of preliminary considerations here. Firstly, I must distinguish the value theory of ethics from other theories of ethics whose principles are also values. That is, the principle of utility to maximize happiness is a value for utilitarianism, and the principles of reason and goodwill are values for Kantian ethics. That is, for Kantian ethics and utilitarianism, goodwill and happiness are their objectives and their values respectively. But on a value theory of ethics, the objective itself is value that we also value as a principle of ethics. Hence, on a value theory of ethics, we might value value as the will to value and a pursuit of value. And in this respect, we can quote Charles Gray Shaw from a century ago when he wrote, "Value as a principle of ethics has been overlooked by both ancient and modern philosophy." I argue for a general neglect of value in my other podcasts. Yet a theory of ethics is required to demonstrate at least 3 or 4 things. These are a foundation, a formal principle, and its material outcomes. The foundation of a value theory ethics is found in the structures of consciousness and value. The formal principle of value theory is the will to value, or the affirmation of value, and material content or outcome is provided by the judgment of actions as good or bad. Yet of course this judgment will be contingent and fallible. This brings us to a 4th requirement, also voiced by Bernard Williams, that an ethics must also account for error and weakness beyond Kant's apodictic certainty. And value theory ethics is fallibilist in its material content, as well as it being inescapable for 2 reasons. One, it is inescapable because the satisfaction of human motivation must inevitably be directed towards value. 2, it's fallibilist in the manner of Popper's fallibilist theory of knowledge and falsification theory of science. That is, the material content of action is only directed by our best assessments of knowledge and reason. This is the case because we are required to work from the principle of the best thing to do in a pragmatic way. Harming others without cause, for example, is pathological, which also reflects negative value on yourself. And taking things that don't belong to you and that you don't need is greed, which also reflects negative value. And of course, such presuppose an awareness of these things, which is why value theory ethics is a fallibilist theory in its material content of action. In conclusion, a review of the strengths and weaknesses of virtue theory have led us to value theory ethics. The principal weakness of virtue theory were a neglect of value and a lack of clear principles of action. Its strengths, however, were its versatility of action and its ability to make human responses. My response to these strengths and weaknesses was to retain the conceptual framework of virtue theory, and this was done by reinterpreting virtue states as value states. This move immediately brought a number of resolutions. The concept of value brought both focus to individual actions and to a final objective. That is, Aristotle's eudaimonia and magnanimity found a parallel with a sufficiency of value. I can also repeat that Aristotle's virtue theory were concerned with life more broadly than ethical actions. Similarly, the principle of the will to value leading to a sufficiency of value is applicable to every aspect of life, such as meaning, purpose and value experience. Yet a comparison of virtue theory with value theory is of no advantage in the event of the failure of value theory. So next week we'll be taking a closer look at value theory of ethics. So let me have your comments and criticisms at the meeting or on websites like Zoom or meetup.com.